Well, Sisters in Crime Australia is delighted to welcome you to our August 2020 crime fiction event. I'm Robyn Walton, and the two authors we'll be talking with tonight are Megan Goldin and Shona Husk. Now, at the outset, we acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia. We recognise our continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Thank you. Now, just to say very quickly a little about our theme for the night and our two guests, and then hopefully they'll begin to talk instead of me. Our title for this event is Watery Graves. And I think that tells you something right away, because if you think about it, most of us consider water to be a good thing, even a beautiful and wonderful thing. We drink it, put it on our garden, swim in it, sail in it, walk beside it. But show a crime writer a body of water, what do they start thinking? I think they think body. They think accident, mishap, assault, murder, graves. So we ended up with Watery Graves as a topic for linking these two books and quite a few others. It seems to be one of those zeitgeist things at the moment. Stories being set by water, by coasts or by riverine settings, and where things can happen. Now, the two authors, as I've mentioned, Megan and Shona, I'll tell you just a touch more about them. Megan is the author of 3 crime novels. You can see them, in fact, lined up behind her there on a bookshelf. And the first, The Girl in Kellers Way, I met Megan at that time because she came to Sisters in Crime and spoke on a panel, so that was great. And that book was also shortlisted for the Davitt Awards that following year. The second novel did really, really well in America, The Escape Room. Now, the screenwrites have been sold, have they not?
Yes, they
Yes,
have.
Great. And script development underway?
Yes, yeah.
Yes. Where are we up to with all of that?
I don't know since coronavirus started, but I know that there's a script that's been quite advanced. So,
Yay.
But of course, everything's come to a bit of a halt now over the past few months with everything that's happened.
Yeah, and they're talking feature film?
Yes, yeah.
Great. Wow, that's fantastic for a second book. Congratulations. Yes. And now your third novel, the one we're talking about tonight, and which can be seen behind your left shoulder, is The Night Swim. Megan's a former journalist. She worked for Reuters and other major news media groups, chiefly in the Middle East, also some Asia, I believe, in the States. So she's spent quite a lot of her adult life out of Australia, but we're fortunate to have her living these days in Melbourne and readily accessible to us. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And Shona, not to be outdone, is the author of about 40 books and counting.
Yep.
Some miraculous. I was stunned when I learned that. And she's also one of those clever people who works across genres. So science fiction is love, fantasy, romantic suspense, paranormal.
Yep.
Right. And some sort of mashup of all 4 sometimes, I suspect, or at least a couple maybe. Yes?
Yep.
Okay. But somehow or another, Shona's been lured over to the crime side, and she has now a new title, which is called Close to the Truth, published by HarperCollins, available as an ebook. So that's the one we'll be talking about this evening. Shona works as a civil designer when she's not writing. What does that involve?
Roads and drainage, mostly.
And water, hydrology. Oh, good. There might be a few bodies down those drains. Oh, God. And you live in Western Australia, is that?
Yes.
In the city? Or, yes.
Southern suburbs.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's get going. Just to tell people format also, we'll talk for maybe 35 minutes or so, and then there'll be about 5 minutes at the end where we'll be awarding some bundles of prize books to some lucky people who've registered in advance, and mention a couple of other upcoming events. So we do hope you can last the distance with us and have a bit of fun. Now, our thoughts when we conferred a little prior to getting together for this were that we might talk about 3 topics which come together to form books, so these people can tell us about their processes of getting together. And I thought that it also provides a challenge to those who are listening, that they might imagine how they themselves would get together a book given those same 3 ingredients. So here's the scenario. Imagine you're an experienced novelist, such as these two are, you're given 3 ingredients for a new story, and these are the 3 that you can manipulate in any fashion at all. A protagonist who fronts a popular program that goes out to general public. Number 2, that body of water we mentioned, possibly with a background of mishaps, accidents, or whatever happening nearby it. And number 3, a 16-year-old girl, at least one. So they're the 3. So if you're listening, watching, and think maybe you've got it in you to be a crime writer, maybe you can think a little about how you would manipulate those ingredients to create an enticing whole. And meantime, 2 people will tell us about how they did it. Ready to go. So, ingredient 1, as you recall, that was the protagonist who presents some form of media program. And I'm going to ask Shona first to talk about what she did with that idea and how she came to have that idea.
I really wanted a reason for my heroine Jasmine to go back to her hometown, which she left under dubious circumstances, and also for her to be able to investigate the local cryptid, which in the book is the Riverman. And a cryptid is like the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot. So, you know, their existence isn't confirmed, but there's always a lot of sightings and a lot of talk. And there are quite a lot of TV shows and websites that investigate these phenomena. So I thought that would be a fun idea. And I just sort of envisioned it as like a US cable TV show that viewers can do the sleuthing with the host as they go through the process of looking at the science and the mythology around the cryptid.
So there are shows like this, or you just dreamed this up?
No, there's plenty of shows. It's a popular topic, looking for cryptids, looking for the proof they exist. Yeah.
Did you know this? Megan, did you know this? I didn't know this.
I guess it's probably like a modern day twist on Ripley's Believe It or Not. Is that right?
Yeah, maybe. I think people like to investigate these things because they've been around for so long. They're part of the local legends where they exist.
So you've used, I think, distinguished between a myth, a hoax, and this cryptid word. Which does that mean?
So yes, for the TV show, they look at things, whether it's a myth, a cryptid or a hoax. So hoax is, for the purpose of the TV show, is something that's man-made and has been developed to fool people into thinking this thing exists. A myth is something that is part of the local law, but there's nothing there, no evidence to support that it's actually a physical presence. And a cryptid is something where there is a physical presence, but the hosts can't explain what it is, which is what a cryptid is. You know, you can't explain what it is, but there's possibly something there.
Oh, do we have some Australian cryptids?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm not sure, really. I have to say I don't tend to dip into the lore of living peoples because I create my own.
The protagonist, Jasmine, fronts this show and has a team of who come with her. How does that work?
She's got a couple of guys who help out and, you know, look at the science, look at the local law, help interview the locals about cryptid occurrences that have occurred, who's seen it, who's got a story to tell, because that makes good TV.
Yeah, and talking good TV, how does she present herself? What sort of person is she in her presence on the screen?
Very professional. She's very different to the girl who left town. Okay. So she's cleaned up her act and changed her name and moved on. And so, of course, she's dragged back for the story.
And, yes, what's the story? It's your title, The River Man, is...
The River Man, the cryptid?
Yes.
Yes, so he's the local legend. He's been around for a couple of 100 years and people are sure that he exists because every so often there's a deer killing or something like that. And the town has created a bit of a festival to celebrate his presence and draw people in for tourism and that kind of thing.
So he's a horrible rather unpleasant presence that comes up out of a river and kills deer, or is this how it works?
Yeah. And
And
that's, they start investigating and uncover a whole lot of truths that they didn't expect to find.
Okay. Now, how did you come to the idea of using a protagonist who's a presenter of a TV program like that?
It was just really as a vehicle to get Jasmine back home and to have her exploring the legend and confronting her past. Because it is a romance as well, and when she fled, she left her boyfriend Gil behind to deal with other consequences, and yeah, getting her home and seeing who recognised her and, you know, confronting her old flame and her old tormentors was part of the story.
Yes, I meant to mention earlier, I'm sorry, yes.
Oh no, I was going to say, for me it was mostly just a plot device really to then have this, and also have the reader then being able to try and figure things out along with her.
That's a neat one, yes. No, I just meant to mention earlier, I think your work's significant because obviously people mix genres, but here you are doing crime, bringing in traces of other genres you've worked with, and that's fairly cutting edge, isn't it? It's not totally innovative, but it's experimental and it takes genres further than they've been possibly. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think a lot of romantic suspense includes those kinds of elements of danger and romance and crime. Yeah, so it's just a question of how weighted it is towards romance and how weighted it is towards the crime solving, I guess.
Yeah, except you've got the paranormal spooking around the edges too.
Yes, well, because paranormal is one of my first loves, I did enjoy playing with the cryptid in the book.
Right, okay. We'll go to Megan for the same question then. In a sense, what made you think of using a protagonist who has a popular program, and what's the program like?
When I started writing The Night Swim, I wanted to write a novel about a rape trial, and I wanted my readers to be in the courtroom effectively and watch the trial unfold. And I initially thought of doing it from the perspective of the jury, but it didn't work when I started writing it that way. And I realized I needed to write it from a different perspective, somebody who'd be in the court, but would also be outside the court, kind of being able to investigate things. And I don't know, it's sort of, my ideas come to me very organically, like in my sleep or something. So it's never really a conscious decision, but I just started, this character emerged, and her name's Rachel Krall. She's a podcaster. Her podcast is a lot like Serial, the famous American podcast that really was this big blockbuster podcast that started the rage of true crime podcasts. So hers is very similar to that. And it's called Guilty or Not Guilty, the podcast that puts you in the jury box. So effectively, she puts her listeners in the jury box by covering this trial. And by extension, I put my readers in the jury box as well. So it worked really nicely for me. And it gave me the opportunity to be able to explore the trial from inside the courtroom, and at the same time have somebody outside the courtroom who's looking at broader issues and being able to investigate other aspects of the story, because there's two narratives within this story. One is the rape trial, and the other is a mysterious death of a teenage girl 2 decades earlier. So it was just sort of this natural, I don't know, it just sort of occurred to me, and I played around with it, and it just seemed to work, so I kept going with it.
Now, you were a listener to podcasts, or how did you learn how to write the script for an episode of a podcast? I'm early on in my career in journalism, I worked in radio, and so podcasts are effectively radio, maybe slightly less formal in style, but it was very natural for me to write that style. I listened to a few podcasts and I got a sort of a sense of voice, and I just wrote it. And in fact, those were the easiest chapters to write because they just literally just came so easily to me. And they worked out really well because they allowed me to play around with the story and look at it from different perspectives and bring in
elements that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to bring in. Like, Rachel kind of talks about, she effectively sets up the crime through her podcast. So she allows the reader to sort of experience what might have happened on that night of that rape in terms of the lead up to it. And it also, there are chapters where she talks about the issues related to the trial and sexual assault and the law and that sort of thing that would have been difficult to bring into the narrative if it had been done in a different way.
They're outstanding chapters, I would say. They're the ones that stayed most in my mind from The Voice. You really read them very, very readily, and you can imagine them, hearing them in a sense, yes. I think of them as an audiobook, of course. Did you have one already out?
Yes, I think there's one out in Australia and one out in the US. For some reason, the publishers do different with their own one. So the one in the US has 3 actors, each one reading the narratives.
So those chapters would really flow very readily, yes.
Yes.
I had one more thought on that. Does Rachel take positions, or does she try to be balanced and unbiased?
So she goes into this particular rape trial really trying and intending to be objective. She sees her role as being objective. But as the trial unfolds and she starts learning about the different participants in this trial, she does find it she really struggles with being objective as the trial, progresses. And she admits to that she's getting to a point where it's really hard for her to take a neutral stance on this trial.
Yeah, and as I asked Shona, what sort of presentation does she give of herself? How does she sound, or does she show her face in materials? Or?
So Rachel is like the presenter of Serial. She's incredibly famous, but people don't know what she looks like. She's this voice that everyone's familiar with because they hear it on this blockbuster podcast, but she tries to keep a low profile. She likes her private life. She doesn't want to be noticed and have to give out autographs. So people don't know who she is, which allows her also to move around and not be, not have people, talking to her or trying to present their positions to her on different issues. It gives her a certain amount of anonymity, which allows her to do a lot more than if she was a famous person doing that.
At the same time, she's got what a glorious sort of recording voice. She sounds good.
Yeah. So the one of the paragraphs compares her to Nigella Lawson, for example, and says something like she did for podcasts what Nigella Lawson did for fried eggs or whatever. So she's got this very, sensual voice, and a voice that really connects with her audience as well. And I did that because I wanted my readers to kind of hear her when I got to those podcast chapters. I wanted them already to be able to sort of hear her voice as they read those chapters. So I wanted to kind of create what her voice might sound like.
She has to beguile the audience then and carry them along.
Yes. Very much so.
Oh, good. Well done. Or entice, I think, was a word you used somewhere along the way too. Which, yes. Yeah. So shall we go to ingredient 2? For those who are working on this at home, or our 2 authors are thinking here, ingredient 2 was water, a body of water. So we'll go back to Shona. What's the water factor in your story?
The water is a river. It's quite swift, so it can be quite dangerous because of the currents, but it's also very much a boundary that has to be crossed to enter and leave the town. So it's very much a threshold crossing. For Jasmine, as she leaves first when she's 16, but also then as she re-enters for the first time as an adult, she's very aware that she's crossing into, old territory, and, she's going to have to deal with a lot of stuff there. She does actually end up in the river because you couldn't have a story about a river monster with a river without the heroine ending up in it. And she does come face to face with the riverman as well. And yes, she discovers just how cold and swift the river moves and how unforgiving it can be. It's not like our warm beaches or anything. It's, it saps your strength and is quite dangerous.
We should say, yes, it's up in the Seattle area, is it not Washington State?
So it's a cold, swift flowing river. So, sucks your strength and... Yeah,
Yes.
not good.
I'd forgotten that. When I was reading it, because I thought it translates fairly well to an Australian setting, I was imagining Australian rivers and not counting that factor in, that it's really deathly, even perhaps to step into. Yes. And she really does have an immersive experience there.
She
Which
does.
she does get out at the other end for the romance to be sorted.
Yes, yes.
We can tell people that much.
Yes, yes. There is a happily ever after at the end.
Who's the other partner in this?
Gil is the hero. So he's the son of the town cop.
Okay.
So yes, there's still those long-standing issues for him as well in his family. So his family came from the right side of the tracks, and her family came from the wrong side of the tracks.
Yes, that's true. Yes. Yes, quite literally. And they live close to the river on land which runs down to it in several different properties. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a lot of properties that, back onto the river, and, like any town, you make good use of the resources that you have.
Yes, and it's not a really expanding town, so it's still rather old style in the town way of...
Yeah. I'd kind of envisioned one of those towns which had probably flourished but had contracted just a little bit, and now they really needed that tourism to come in, just to give them that little bit of extra, the businesses a bit of extra, and so it has become quite a thing.
To have this festival. Yes. But is that endangered now by anything at all?
Well, this is part of the problem, because the town knows that if the riverman is disproven or whatever, then there's going to be other consequences. So it's not just about Jasmine and her TV show. There's a whole lot of politics there as well.
A couple of American thrillers lately have had similar things. It's obviously a universal problem of towns changing over from primary production, forestry, things like this, to either subsiding, in a sense, if they don't have tourism, or bringing in the heavy industry, the new tech, fracking, things like this. It's problematic, isn't it? So you're hitting something that's really a problem at the moment. Yeah, and Gil runs an old-fashioned style of hardware shop got from his grandfather, doesn't he?
Yes, he didn't follow in his father's footsteps and become a cop, mostly because he hasn't spoken to his father in a while. Mm-hmm. So there's family difficulties, but he's aware as well that the town is changing, and things need to change.
Yeah.
Adapt.
Yes, but most people are not that keen to do that too quickly. I gather no one seems to be rushing to embrace, innovation. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I think it is an issue small towns do face, particularly if they're no longer primary producers and all that. Industry has to change. People come, people go.
Yes. Would you actually encounter that in your work, your civil engineering and design and so on?
No, I work in Perth, so I've never...
Yeah, not firsthand.
No.
Contact with that, yeah. Okay. Yeah, now we'll go, Megan, Bodies of Water. Where's yours set?
My novel is set in a fictional town called Neapolis on the North Carolina, on the Atlantic coast. It's a relatively small town that is on an area of coast that's hit by hurricanes very frequently, and the ocean is rough there. The coastline changes every year, so it's constantly changing. And there's a jetty there where there's a lot of drownings in the area, boating accidents over the course of centuries that people have lived there. And in this jetty, there are little memorial plaques on the jetty to some of the people who've drowned there. So that's the town of Neapolis. It's a town that I created, but there's probably similar towns like that along that coastline. It's a really interesting area historically as well. It's quite near where Kitty Hawk, where the first, the Wright brothers flew their plane, maybe a couple of 100 kilometers away, but it's in that strip of Atlantic coast in the US. And the town of Neapolis it's a town, used to be a much smaller town where everyone kind of knew everyone. And you had the establishment families, and then you had the families that lived on the periphery, both socially and geographically. And in recent years, it's become popular with retirees. There are a lot of retirement villages there, and there's a few military bases nearby too. So the population is quite a bit bigger than it used to be. But the core of the people who live in the town are people who grew up together and whose parents grew up together. So they know each other quite well.
Yeah, same as Shona set up, yes. It's wonderful for storytelling, isn't it? You can take it back 10, 20, 30 years, even more. And the water itself is the Atlantic, is it?
Yeah, so the water are the beaches of the area. I have two characters. One is there's a rape trial, and the teenage girl who was raped, it occurred on a beach near the town. And there's a drowning from 2 decades earlier of another teenage girl, which turns out to be connected. And she obviously drowned, and she drowned in the ocean. In fact, near this jetty that I mentioned earlier with the plaques that commemorate people who've drowned along that coastline. So the ocean is very prominent in the story, both in terms of the crimes that happened and in terms of how it affects people's lives, the rhythms of the ocean and the storms that come in from the Atlantic and the hurricanes that come in and change the coastline and change effectively the society of the town as well.
Okay, right, yes, you're both taking metaphorical meanings out of the water. Yes, yeah. And the title of your book, how does that refer? The Night Swim, what's that significance?
It's the, again, but you have two teenagers 25 years apart. One drowned in a mysterious drowning that Rachel Krall, the podcaster, looks into, discovers it wasn't as straightforward as it had appeared. And so she went swimming at night, supposedly, and drowned. And then we have the teenager, Kelly Moore, who went on a quote unquote, date with the town's golden boy. He's a swimmer and he's heading to the Olympics, and he took her to a beach at night to eat pizza, and that's where the crime occurred. That is the subject of this rape trial. So in both cases, it's connected to water and swimming and so on, and nighttime.
So it's one of the night swim. Yeah, it's quite often, sadly, a recipe for a disaster when there's alcohol, night, riptides, all these things come together. Yes, it's not the best, is it? Particularly, I think, males, maybe 25 to 45, that sort of age group, I think a frequent drowning, that sort of combination happening. But in your case, it's young women that are the victims.
Correct, yes.
Yeah. That takes us to ingredient 3, does it not? Which was 16-year-old girls. What is it about the age of 16 for boys or girls? Either of you want to start on that one?
Well, for me, 16 is sort of an age where you're testing boundaries and exploring who you are, who you think you might be. But I think you're also starting to see the injustices around, but often looking to parents and other adults to fix it. So for my heroine, she never had anybody to help her. So she, all she could do was run. Obviously,
she had a mother, didn't in her life?
She did, but her mother's fairly worn down and wasn't able to help much, again, because of family situations. But really, for this book, I also wanted to turn around that trope of the town bad boy makes good and comes home a success. And I really wanted, Jasmine to be, she was the bad girl. She was known as being the bad girl. And she fled and has returned a success. And not everybody likes that.
What was the definition of bad, if we could?
Oh, she got around.
Yeah.
She was, just being 16 and, doing what she wanted. I think a lot like Megan's book, there was a lot of it was talk and not reality. But given the family that she came from, nobody was going to turn around and say that's a lie. There was, no one there to defend her. She didn't come from a good family.
Yes. That's often the difference, rather than their behaviour, which is just average teenage behaviour.
Yeah, because Gil, who was the same age, he came from a good family, and of course his past just got all cleaned up.
Yes. And coincidentally, Megan's 25-year-old again, 25 years back family, seems very similar to that. I mean, there's a mother, there's not a dad around, there's illness, there's some poverty, they're struggling. And the girl seems to get a bad rep. Yeah, not doing anything much at all.
It does. It is interesting because there is a parallel there. So the girl who died 25 years ago, her name was Jenny, and she came from one of these poor families that lived on the periphery of society. It's kind of alluded. You can kind of tell that her mother came. Her mother had a hard time too. She was a single mother. I think there's some sense that her mother had a very difficult upbringing, and then she had these two daughters that she devoted herself to. And when Jenny starts getting into trouble when she's 16, her mother has cancer, and so her mother's struggling with her own health. So there's nobody really to take care of Jenny, because the town sort of looks down on this family. They're very marginalized in the town, and she doesn't have a parent to protect her. And as a result, she falls prey to some of the more influential young men in the town who see her as vulnerable. And I think probably, in real life, very often the people who are vulnerable are people who don't have people to look after them, maybe because they are from poor families or single parents or no families or whatever. So in this case as well, she's really comes from a very vulnerable background, and people take advantage of that.
Yes, they really coerce her, don't they? In her case, she's almost hauled into vehicles or encouraged to come out with these chaps that she really isn't finding it very appealing at all, was my impression.
Well, she's vulnerable. I mean, again, and that comes to poverty because, they're poor. They don't have means of transport. And when you don't have somebody to drive you around and you have to get around by yourself, that puts you in situations potentially that, somebody else might not have been. So the two daughters, their mother's ill with cancer. They go to the beach every summer day during the holidays, but their mum can't drive them because she's ill, so they have to walk. And then that puts them, they live on the outskirts of town, so these sort of quiet country roads, and then that puts them in unsafe situations.
Yeah. How did you come to think of that scenario?
I don't plan. I think I mentioned that before. So I don't plan anything. I just write and the characters emerge. And when I wrote The Night Swim, I wrote the first chapter, which is the opening chapter, which is about Jenny and her, written from the perspective of the younger sister, Hannah, looking back on her childhood and this terrible tragedy that happened to her older sister, Jenny. And I just wrote it. I just thought, I'm just going to write a really good opening chapter. I have no idea what it's going to be about. I'm just going to write. And I did that. And it sort of set the scene because suddenly it was this poor family, this marginalized family. I had two sisters. They were living on the edge of town. It was a coastal town. It was summer. So a lot of the themes and aspects of the story were set already with that opening chapter. And then I kind of just kept on going, really. And it kind of just developed itself after that.
Yes, it flows comfortably as if they're natural associations, even though you're actually highly crafted in terms of the book. You're very skillful with, dropping in the information and the cliffhangers at the end of each chapter and all those things. But yet it seems not uncontrived, but quite beguiling page turners, as they say, when, yeah. And Shona, how did you find that creating a flow in your story with them?
Just weaving in the history of Jasmine and Gil. It just kind of naturally happens. Like, I don't have any set flashbacks. You just learn about their history as they re-meet and, again, as the town starts making assumptions and as Jasmine's identity is revealed. So you kind of learn it as you go.
Yeah, so we're looking back 10 years to a 16-year-old. She's mid-20s now. Yeah. Successful for mid-20s, yeah. And a modern day 16-year-old, contemporary of now. Megan has several in the storyline. How did you write those?
I guess I still remember what it was like being 16.
Okay, yeah.
I have the character Kelly, who the teenager who was raped, is 16, and I did a lot of research about sexual assault and so on. And so when I wrote it and her experiences, a lot of it was drawn from things that I'd read and people I'd spoken to. And I tend to put myself, when I write, I kind of put myself in my character's shoes. So a lot of what she went through, I guess I emoted to an extent in my own mind as I was writing it, and kind of living her life essentially as I was writing it.
Yeah.
She, you know, so she had this, she was raped by the town's golden boy. And then when she presses charges, the town becomes, and it goes to trial, the town becomes divided. They take sides. They're both from well-known families. Many people feel like he's worked his entire life to make it to the Olympics. She's ruining it, that somehow she was at fault, and that it's not fair to destroy. And even if she wasn't, it's not fair for her to destroy his life that way. So there are really strong emotions in this town as this case goes to court. And because it's a rape trial, and it's, I guess, a quote unquote date rape, in that, you know, they knew each other. She was with him in the car. They went to get pizza. So a lot of the case really rests on her testimony, and she has to get up in court and testify as to what happened. And she's just a teenager. So it's a terribly traumatic experience for anybody, but for a teenager to get up in court and talk about the most traumatic day of her life is doubly, you know, difficult. And so a lot of the story is about, you know, it sort of reaches this climax where she has to get up in court and testify, and it's so crucial that she do that. Yes,
and you anticipate there'll be horrifying things happening when you think of the cross-examining of young victims, you know, which can go on for hours and days. It's, yeah, courts are not necessarily just, are they? I guess struggling with those sort of phenomena then.
Yeah, I think those types of cases are very difficult to be held in court. There's no, I mean, even today maybe they try and make efforts to try and make it a little bit easier, but at the end of the day they still have to get up there, they still have to talk about it, they still have to be questioned and answer questions. And so as a result, she had to relive her experience, which is a terrible thing to have to do that.
Yes, and brings in her siblings, her family, everyone around is affected then. So there are rippling, watery repercussions, one might say.
Yeah.
And Shona, similar things, your 16-year-old, 26-year-old connects with others apart from Gil?
Jasmine, when she gets back to town, she doesn't really connect with a lot of people because, of course, she's still trying to disconnect from her past. It's not until people realise who she is that she actually has to start facing up to it and dealing with things. But she's very lucky in that, you know, she does reconnect with Gil, and obviously they still have feelings because there's a happily ever after. But it's with him that she's able to sort of work through a lot of this stuff. So she's finally got the support that she needed. You know, she reconnects with her parents, and yeah, it's a different tone to Megan's book.
But they both cover a lot of territory really in just a few days. They're both compressed at the same time as they look back expansively to other times.
The ticking clock adds suspense.
Okay. The ticking clock has hit us. I think we should pause on our speaking and call some lucky numbers. How about that? Let's go to our lucky ticket holders. Thank you very much for talking with us first, of course, Megan and Shona, telling us about your books. We wish you the best of luck with sales, reception of them, and film rights and all other good things. Now, we collectively have the pleasure here of giving away 3 sets of books. They're worth about $150 each. They've been kindly donated and acquired by publishers. I'm going to ask Megan first if she can choose a number between 1 and 47.
I will take 36.
Okay, so registrant number 36 will be winning one of the packs. Now we go to Shona.
I'm going to go for number 16 because 16 has been a number of the night.
Indeed. Okay, 16 it is. I get to choose the third. I haven't even thought of one yet. I'll say 47. Okay, so those 3 people will be notified, and we'll also put their names up on our social media or website so that everyone else can know who was the lucky person. Now, just a couple of mentions of housekeeping affairs. Sisters in Crime is very happy to be associated with the Sun bookstore, which is in Yarraville in Melbourne. Now, during these COVID times, it's not open to the public, but it does have online services. That'll be the first port of call, I'd hope, for Megan's book, if you want to chase that, or the first 2. And if you're a member of Sisters in Crime, you can also get a discount at the Sun. Shona's current book and previous ones are mostly ebooks. So you recommend Amazon or other large retailers of ebooks?
Any of their preferred retailers, ebook retailers.
Yep, fine, pretty broad. Okay, that's excellent. If you're also hanging around the Sisters in Crime YouTube channel, after watching this, you might look back, you'll see there have been a couple more similar presentations of panel discussions with authors, and you'll also see other things which are labelled Murder Mondays. Now, these are brief interviews. They go for probably half an hour with a single author, and they've been fabulously successful so far. We've had international big names such as Anne Cleeves was the last one of that ilk, and also local, and Karina Kilmore is the questioner of those people. Sisters in Crime has a website that's updated at least monthly. There you can catch blogs, book reviews, recent news, written Q&As with authors and so on. So that's always worth keeping up with. Then we have the usual socials. We have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and there's a monthly e-newsletter which you can subscribe to and get on your email system. It's called A Stab in the Dark, and that will again update you on things and give you links if you want to register for events or find out more about things going on in allied institutions and organisations. And our next event will be dealing with the Davitt Awards. That's annual awards for writing by Australian women who write in the crime area, both non-fiction and fiction. As we mentioned earlier, Megan was shortlisted not so long ago for one of those. If you keep an eye on the website, the emails and those socials, you'll soon see details for the dates and the times for watching that, and it'll be well worth catching because we'll also interview a big name author and have a bit of fun around the awarding of the prizes to the best books for that year. So it brings us to my thank yous. I thank you, Megan. Thank you, Shona.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly Gardner and the others behind the scenes who make this possible to happen. And thank you to our audience. If you've been stimulated to write a book or to envisage a plot, start writing. For the rest of us, keep reading, keep watching, enjoy yourselves. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.